and welcome. Getting into some of our work here with the middle chapters of the book. Some of the stuff after 2 and 3 in the developmental concerns, and some of the things that show up with our quick PowerPoints over the book. So we've gotten towards the end of childhood and how important developmentally everything is. Most people have turned in their genogram and that eco map. So looking at how poverty and food deserts could affect us are considered, how the neighborhood we were brought up in, if there was a traumatic event growing up, which a lot of us did have COVID. And so considering those things becoming important for development is definitely in the cards. We've also got food deserts and poverty affecting development. And there's a few videos I wanted to kick into on this because some shorter and some a bit longer about even what they're trying to do to end the childhood poverty, because they could miss those cognitive abilities for these different outcomes. So here is the first few. We'll do the cartoon one first because this is a little bit of the easiest.
We hear a lot these days in the media about families in poverty who are struggling. We're told they're making bad choices and need to change. But are families in poverty really so different to others? We spent time with 8 families and surveyed 1,000 parents and children in England, rich and poor, to learn more about what life is like for them. Nick spends pocket money on new clothes. His parents buy him tickets to music festivals, and his uncle arranges work experience in his international company. Rose gets second-hand clothes from her friends, stops asking for a music magazine because mum could not afford it, and works in the local leisure centre. Frances gets an iPad from her parents. She uses it to do homework with her friends and gets annoyed when other kids in her class haven't done homework. George's parents can't afford a tablet. He has to borrow the school's and do his homework there. He does it alone so his friends don't see, and he struggles with homework because he can't take it home, and then feels upset when people think he hasn't bothered. The children who we spoke to, rich and poor, had similar aspirations and ways of doing things, and their families were doing their best to support them. But children in poverty are 5.7 times more likely to be excluded from social experiences, 5.5 times more likely to go hungry, and 5.9 times more likely to have been made to feel ashamed because they don't have money. Children and families in poverty aren't doing anything differently in a way that causes their poverty, but they are having to do extra things to deal with that poverty. Together, we can help these families by campaigning and working to reverse the cuts made to poorest families' incomes, make sure all families have enough to live on, make sure that children in poverty aren't excluded from experiences and activities, change how we talk and think about poverty so that people aren't made to feel ashamed or different.
So that's the quick, brief, and overall. Here is some of the policies that are modern day they're trying to reduce child poverty with.
This January, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences published findings from the Baby's First Year study. The study examines the effects of poverty reduction on children. To learn more about those findings, NewsHour Weekend's Zachary Green spoke to two of the study's co-authors, Dr. Kimberly Noble of Columbia Teachers College and Professor Hiro Yoshikawa of New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development.
So, Dr. Noble, how much does the brain actually develop in those first 3 years of life?
Quite a bit. So in the first several months of life, we know that trillions of connections between cells are developing. And in the first few years of life, that happens more than any other time of life.
Professor Yoshikawa, can you tell us about the importance of a child's external environment during this time? How does their home life affect their social emotional development?
Early childhood is a period of heightened malleability, in especially the first 1,000 days of life. And those do build the social emotional foundations for later relationships, for relating to other children in school, to all of the later social interactions that are really the foundations of our society.
So, Dr. Noble, the results of the baby's first year clinical trial show that there was a causal relationship between unconditional cash payments to mothers and more fast-paced brain activity in their infants after the first year. Can you explain these results to us? How exactly is cash connected to brain activity in children?
So back in the spring of 2018, we began recruiting 1,000 mothers living with low income shortly after they gave birth in a number of hospitals around the United States. And upon enrolling in the study, these mothers were offered the opportunity to receive a monthly unconditional cash gift that they would be free to spend however they would like, no strings attached. But critically, the mothers were randomized to receive either $333 a month, or about $4,000 a year, or $20 a month, or $240 a year. And so in this way, by tracking the differential impact of these different amounts of money on early childhood development, we can actually say something about the extent to which reducing poverty causes changes for children. And finally, we know that unfortunately, kids who are raised in poverty or face other forms of early adversity often show less fast-paced and more slow-paced brain activity early in childhood compared to their more advantaged peers. After 1 year of monthly unconditional cash support, the infants of the mothers in the high cash gift group are showing more fast-paced brain activity, particularly in regions of the brain that we know support the development of subsequent things in learning. There's a couple things to note here. We started this measurement before the onset of the pandemic, and once the pandemic struck, we were no longer able to travel into the family's homes to measure infant brain activity. And so that meant that we had a smaller sample than we initially planned for. As a result, some of our analyses have a smaller sample, as I mentioned, and therefore we're not able to be 100% certain that some of these results didn't happen by chance. Nonetheless, when we look across the entire range of analyses that we wrote about in that paper, we believe that the weight of the evidence suggests that indeed, after 1 year of monthly unconditional cash support, the infants of the mothers in the high cash gift group are indeed showing patterns of faster brain activity.
So, Professor Yoshikawa, in terms of the social science of the study, what results are you seeing in the families who receive the larger cash payments compared to those who receive smaller sums?
So far, on a preliminary basis, what we're seeing is that the parents are spending more money in the high cash gift group on learning materials like books and toys, and that they're engaged more in parent-child learning activities, which are things at that age like storytelling or reading picture books. So that's what we're seeing so far, but that's preliminary.
So how much weight should we be putting on these initial findings that have been published so far?
So, these early brain findings are tantalizing, but they are just that. They are early. So, as one of my collaborators, Dr. Sarah Halford-Meekin, often says, measuring the impact of the baby's first year's cash gifts after just 1 year is a little bit like trying to understand the influence of a college education after freshman year, right? So it's somewhat telling, certainly tantalizing, but not definitive.
And again, to both of you, what are the next steps in the baby's first year study? How long are you going to be following these families for, and what are you going to be looking out for?
Our next wave of data collection will be in person around the children's 4th birthday. States. We're very excited about the rich data that we'll be collecting on child development, cognitive, emotional, brain development, as well as trying to understand a bit about mother and child health and family life. But of course, child development doesn't end at age 4, and so we are actively raising funds to be able to continue the study beyond age 4 for at least the next 5 years through middle childhood, if not.
Yeah, we plan to follow these kids forever.
That's the goal.
All right. Dr. Kimberly Noble of Teachers College, Columbia University, and Professor Hiro Yoshikawa.
So different policies there to show help on the child poverty. And one last one.
Poverty is something that affects children before they are even born. Poverty affects the physical, cognitive, and emotional development of children. 1 in 6 children in America live in poverty, so it is important for educators, policymakers, medical professionals, and others working with these children to understand these effects. Children are considered poor if they live in a family with an annual income below the federal poverty line of $25,701 for a family of 4, which amounts to less than $2,142 a month, $494 a week, or $70 a day. Effects of poverty on children begin with their mothers. During pregnancy, their mothers are likely to face multiple stressful life events, including lone mother and teen pregnancies, unemployment, more crowded or polluted physical environments, and far fewer resources to deal with these events. Infants born to women in poverty are at an increased risk for lower birth weight. Children born at a low birth weight are more likely to have special health care needs, are at an increased risk for chronic health conditions such as respiratory problems, poor postnatal growth, and infections. Poverty-stricken families are more likely to use a natural growth parenting style. In this style of parenting, children are more responsible for themselves, and parents do not structure how their kids spend their time. They often do not have resources to enroll kids in extracurricular activities. Living on a low income can bring multiple stresses to parents, such as lack of food, debt, homelessness, and limited social opportunities. This affects family relationships, harms parents' physical and mental health, and contributes to feelings of stigma, isolation, and exclusion. Parents living in poverty are more likely to display punitive behavior by shouting or yelling, and are less likely to display warmth by hugging. Long-term harsh treatment results in insecure emotional attachment to parents, behavior problems, poor goal orientation, and low self-confidence. Low-income children are more likely to lack food security, as well as have diets that are deficient in important nutrients. These children are more likely to be obese than their higher income peers. This could be due to lack of full-service grocery stores and recreational areas that promote physical activities. Rates of several health conditions such as asthma, chronic cardiovascular disorders, immune disorders, and psychiatric disorders are higher among low-income children. They are less likely to receive preventative medical and dental care. Increased exposure to stress influences gene function and brain development. It affects specific neurocognitive processes such as working memory, cognitive control, and especially language and memory. Poverty has a particularly adverse effect on the academic outcomes of children, especially during early childhood. Chronic stress associated with living in poverty has been shown to adversely affect children's concentration and memory, which may impact their ability to learn. Children in low-income families are less likely to participate in organized activities and often do not have enough supplies or books in the home. Parents have difficulty providing intellectually stimulating toys for their children to aid in cognitive development and are often less prepared when beginning school. The schools these children attend typically have less qualified teachers, fewer resources, and struggle to meet the needs of these students. Inadequate education contributes to the cycle of poverty by making it more difficult for low-income children to get out of poverty. Children living in poverty are at a greater risk of behavioral and emotional problems. Some behavioral problems may include impulsiveness, difficulty getting along with peers, aggression, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and conduct disorder. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. Violence in the home, having a parent in jail, and emotional neglect increase the amount of toxic stress children face. Children in poverty are more likely to have these experiences than those living above the poverty line. Poor children are more likely to live in neighborhoods where they are exposed to environmental toxins and other physical hazards, including crime and violence. In the case of violence, even witnessing or simply hearing of the occurrence of violence has been linked to adverse developmental outcomes. A study showed that impoverished children had more antisocial behaviors such as aggression and bullying and increased feelings of helplessness than kids from middle-income backgrounds. Some emotional problems may include feelings of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Poverty increases the risk of mental health illness, including schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and substance addiction. Poverty can act as a causal factor. Stress resulting from poverty can cause depression. Perceptions of those in poverty are typically negative. They are stereotyped as lacking warmth and competence. The response to this stereotype is often contempt and harmful behaviors towards those in poverty. These negative perceptions affect how people see themselves. Research regarding the effects of poverty on child development are continuing and should be used when working with these children. Using this research can help inform professionals and policymakers to aid in early interventions to help these children.
So a few of the policies that we try to put in place to reduce child poverty. And there is one last one on the research for Institute for Research on Poverty.
When was the last time you did a proper cleanse of your intestines? Maybe you do them often, maybe you've never done
Your
one.
commercials.
When
So there
most
it
people-
is.
The child poverty rate in the United States has dropped substantially since the 1960s, and we owe much of that to policies and programs that benefit children. These are things like refundable tax credits, nutrition assistance programs, and other supports that keep kids out of poverty, provide them with enough to eat, and give them better environments to grow up in. These efforts we've made as a country have improved child health at birth, made a difference in those critical early years of development, increased math and reading scores in middle school, and improved high school completion. They're even connected to better long-term earnings in adulthood. It turns out that when we invest in kids, it's not just good for them, it's good for their communities and for the country. While a lot more research is needed, it's clear that environments that provide warm, sensitive, and enriching interactions offer children a foundation for healthy development. On the other hand, when children experience prolonged and elevated stress responses, there can be negative effects on children's development. As a society, We make important investments in children, but the investments aren't made evenly. Poor children often don't get the same access to things like quality childcare, good schools, and safe neighborhoods that many other children do. And this adds up to environments that aren't as good for kids. The effects that these environments of poverty have on children are costly, and they lead to a less skilled workforce and lost economic productivity. A recent study looked at the economic potential we lose when we don't ensure that all children receive the investments they need. It showed that child poverty costs our country around $1 trillion a year. That's over 5% of the US gross domestic product. In 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States was in the midst of one of the longest periods of economic growth on record, and unemployment was very low. Even so, 1 in 8 children in the US was living in poverty. This tells us that our system isn't working the way it should. Building a better system of federal, state, and local policies and programs will provide greater stability for our children and long-term benefits for communities. Recently, Congress commissioned a nonpartisan, evidence-based report on how we could cut the child poverty rate in the US by half. We've accomplished this in the past, and the researchers behind the study say we have the tools to do it again. The study focused on ways we could use smart upgrades to existing programs to make big cuts to child poverty. Let's look at some of these programs and how we could upgrade them to reduce child poverty. SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is our most effective program for lifting children out of deep poverty. And we've seen that when we increase SNAP budgets, children's health improves right away. It's already an effective program, but we can make it work better by responding to the times when family food budgets are most strained, like when kids are home during the summer, or for families with teenagers. Child care assistance can offer a dual benefit. It helps with one of the biggest expenses young families face and allows parents to increase their own earnings when they know that their children are safe and cared for while they're at work. We can increase support for these families by making the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit refundable, so it can help families whose child care costs are higher than their tax bills. Another program that operates through the tax system is the Child Tax Credit. Making permanent changes to make credit more generous, fully refundable so the amount doesn't go up or down depending on parents' job situations, and offering payments monthly instead of just at tax time can make it more reliable for families. These examples are just a few programs of many in our policy toolkit that can create better environments for children by using what already works and making it better. We have the evidence to show that child poverty can be reduced dramatically, and that doing so will have long-term payoffs for millions of children and for our country.
So there's a few of these updates on the Ashford book and like how poverty can affect us. So I did want to get back towards chapters 5 and 6, finishing up being halfway through the book on our halfway point. Hey, Tiona, on early childhood, getting into, we already watched the video on the 3 mountain problem, how a kid up to that age is not able to sit on one side and observe and tell them everything and then sit on the other side and say what they see. They have this kind of self-centered perspective, and that's normal development. We also went through the Piaget stages, different things on communication, the progression of how the first words are at like 15 to 18 months. They have a vocabulary spurt at about 22 to 24 months, and then use of sentences will often happen in a kid at 33 to 36 months, just before they turn 3. We did cover some of the parenting styles and some of the videos on that. So those were all in there. The extra credit discussion is like what kind of parenting did you grow up with? Either permissive parent, they're kind of nurturing, affectionate, few or inconsistent boundaries. Also, the uninvolved parent that's emotionally detached, self-absorbed. They have little interaction. You might have authoritarian parent where they're strict, inflexible, high expectations, and then punishes rather than disciplines, known as the tiger mom, or even authoritative parent. They're nurturing, affectionate. They still do set boundaries. They discipline through guidance, so they have open communication. So it shows on the grid too, like warmth and control, like very low control is like the uninvolved or permissive parent. High control is authoritative or authoritarian. Then high warmth or low warmth, it shows, the worst of the parenting could be uninvolved because kids could get in all kinds of stuff. The best, because it's high warmth and high control, is authoritative parent, where they still have boundaries and still have things that they expect you to follow. You might end up getting into college because of a good parenting process. I often speak for myself on that. I probably would not have gotten into college and succeeded with some of that stuff because of my behaviors, but with authoritative parents, some of it was helpful. One parent was more authoritative. I had another one who was more authoritarian. Then teaching children social skills also. So the parents often model it and have skills. It says, will these be on D2L to go back to when we do the assignment? So that assignment was extra credit. These are right out of the book. I know you guys have electronic access to those. The extra credit assignment you can choose to do or not. It's entirely up to you. So genogram and some of the other stuff that we had you turn in showed some of the things that were needed. So let me see. There should be some in there. Are you able to get into your book? Because this is right out of chapter 5. And then parenting styles. So see here. So this one actually has 5 of the parenting styles. So wanted to get into that. And let me know if you're not
The name Vegemore comes from vegan and amor. It's love. Love for life, love
accessing
for
the book very well. See if we can get
In theory, there are only 4 styles of parenting. Authoritarian parents are controlling and demand obedience without considering the child's point of view. Permissive parents are loving but don't exert any control. There are no rules. Authoritative parents are firm but loving. They encourage independence within limits. Neglecting parents are uninvolved and often uninterested in their own child. Recently, a 5th style was proposed, but we will come back to that later. The styles range from controlling and demanding to complete freedom, and from cold and unresponsive to loving and receptive. Each authoritative, permissive, authoritarian, and neglectful parents have their place. To understand what it means to grow up with parents from each end of the spectrum, we can imagine the lives of 4 children. Sarah's parents are authoritarian. They love their girl, but they believe that strict rules are important to make Sarah become well-behaved and fit into society. If Sarah cries, she's told to stop. If she talks back, she is sent to the corner for time out. If she forgets to take care of her chores around the house, she is not allowed to play with her toys. Sarah learns that suppressing her emotions and following her duties is the way to get through the day. To get the love of her parents and to avoid making them upset, she becomes obedient. However, because Sarah was never allowed to decide for herself or follow her intrinsic interests, as an adult, she doesn't know what she really wants. She begins living a life that seems perfect to her parents and society, but might leave her unhappy on the inside. Permissive parents, like those of Peter, enjoy their little boys so much that they believe they should fulfill all his wishes, give him full freedom, and never say no. Peter enjoys full control over his parents and gets whatever he wants. If he doesn't want to walk, he'll be carried. If he wants ice cream he gets. If he wants to play games, he'll be playing them all night. Peter grows up completely without borders and does whatever he thinks is right. He never coped with conflict, and he did not learn to control his emotions. The fact that he always got what he wanted made him a bad loser. As he grows older, he often acts inconsiderate and doesn't know his limits. Arthur's authoritative parents respect their child's needs, but believe that kids need freedom within certain limits. Arthur can freely play, but when he's done, he needs to help tidy up. He is allowed to eat ice cream, but only on Sundays. Screen time is limited to 30 minutes a day. There may be conflict, but the parents listen to what Arthur has to say and then lay down the rules. Arthur learns that some things are difficult, but his parents give him all the support he needs to get through it. He develops the strength to endure hardships and to continue following his interests and passions. In class, he bravely expresses his own opinions in an appropriate manner. During breaks, he can show his emotions and act freely. As an adult, he agrees to rules only after they have been discussed and he feels like he understands them. Neglectful parents are usually not present in their children's life. Nora often feels completely alone in the world. She experiences full freedom to do anything she wants to and has plenty of imagination, but she never receives any feedback or even attention. Nora realizes that it doesn't matter what she does because no one cares anyway. The lack of attention leads to a lack of trust in herself and others. She becomes insecurely attached, unable to form healthy relationships, and develops a negative image of herself. To stop feeling unworthy of love, she tries not to feel anything at all. In recent years, over-involved parents who are present in every aspect of their child's life are often referred to as the fifth style. These parents are also known as snowplows, removing obstacles out of their kids' path, or helicopter parents who hover about and micromanage every aspect of their child's life. Since they won't let their children do anything alone, the children can't learn to overcome challenges by themselves. Research infers that these children don't like to solve difficult problems, lack perseverance, and may even procrastinate in protest when something requires a lot of effort. Since most research on parenting is based on self-reports and was done in the US and Europe, it is not clear how strongly the observed effects will hold up in controlled observational experiments or in other parts of the world. The 4 parenting styles were first introduced by psychologist Diana Baumrind. For good parenting, she advised balance of demandingness and responsiveness. Add to that the wise words of Maria Montessori to never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed, and parents should do pretty well. What do you think? Should parents resort to a specific style, or should they decide what's best to do in a given situation, as long as they don't neglect or abuse their child? To download this video without background music and
So there's some of the breakdown there with parenting and then how we learn those social skills. We will finish up the other half of chapter 5 on Tuesday. Some of the stuff with developmental delays and developmental disorders and even ADHD and autism. So those can be the things you also present on for a major mental health disorder. One of the presentation options, some people have chosen child poverty in the past, even food deserts and development. So those are just some ideas. And again, see you guys on Tuesday. So have a good weekend.